Yeah, shut up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tanya Anderson. I'm the director of the Dr. Ada Lois Scipio Fisher Center for Social Justice and Racial Healing. It is a great privilege to bring to you Marilyn Luper-Hildreth, who is the daughter of the civil rights leader and icon, Claire Luper, who was instrumental in creating the Oklahoma City sit-in movement that lasted from 1958 to 1964. Marilyn, thank you for joining us and participating in the Building Bridges Dismantling Racism Conference.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's my honor.
Marilyn, could you tell us a little bit about the Oklahoma sit-in movement? It's not something that everybody knows about. You know, when we think about the sit-in movement, we think about Greensboro, North Carolina, 1960. But the Oklahoma City movement, led by your mother, predates that.
My mother was an educator by profession. She taught at Dungy High School, which many people consider the country, very low income area. They had a lot of nothing, but they had a lot of pride too, and love to learn. Education was the source of that community. Mom was a writer, and she wrote a play entitled Brother President. Brother President was the story of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. In the audience, when the play was presented, was Herb Wright, who was the National Youth Executive of the NAACP. He was so impressed with the play that he invited her to bring one student up to New York City to put on the play for the National Convention of the NAACP. But you have to know my mother to understand. She said no. Unless she could take all of her students, then she would take none of them. Well, we had everything except money. So she went out in the community and they raised them enough money to take a busload of us to New York City. And that was something that changed the lives of most of the young people in that area. Because I have to give her credit. I thought most of us, but she was an educator and probably should have. Whereas when she planned the trip to New York City, she planned for us to go to New York City through the North. And for the first time in our lives, we had an opportunity to go into a restaurant and sit down like everybody else and order a hamburger and a Coke. Because in Oklahoma City, there's no place we could go. We could go downtown and spend all of our money and then have to go to the back of the alley to eat out of a brown paper sack after we were broke buying stuff in that store. So Harriet Tubman said, a little bit of freedom is a dangerous thing. And I can understand it. Because when we had the opportunity to be able to be treated just like we were somebody, we felt like we were somebody. We went to New York City and we put on that play, and then we put it on. Exciting time in our lives. But then we had to come back. And when we came back through the South, where we faced the age-old problem of segregation, discrimination, hatred, bigotry. But we were on our way home. When we got back to Oklahoma City, we could not understand. We could not understand. Why is it our money was good to buy the product? My grandmother would have to take a string and measure our feet so she could go downtown and buy her shoes.
Mm.
We couldn't try on shoes. And they would have to guess about the size of our clothes. And put when we want a hat, they put this around a string around our heads to see how big our heads were.
Mm.
So we discussed it, and we had organized a chapter of the NAACP Youth Council here. And I made a motion in a meeting, and we met at my house at 1819 Northeast Park Street. And Tanya, you would be tickled to death because it was like a shotgun house. We didn't have a lot, but we had a lot of kids that came in and out of that house because Mama was always teaching, always teaching. And at the meeting that night, we had talked to Downtown Merchant Association about integrating the restaurants in downtown Oklahoma City. And then they said no, that they could not integrate the restaurants in Oklahoma City because white people didn't want to sit next to us. And they would lose their business if they had to serve us a Coke. That sounded dumb to me. And I made a motion after we negotiated for about 18 months that we would just go downtown and sit down until they serve us. And that's what we did. We were taught the passive nonviolent resistance. We were taught how to turn the other cheek in case people hit you or spit on you or kick you. We were taught how to be nonviolent. It just didn't happen. We were actually trained how to accept the insults of the name calling. And Mom used to tell us that, well, you know, especially me, because I had a problem in understanding why you could hate me and you didn't know me. How can you hate me and you don't know me? She told me this. I need to go down to the hardware store and buy me some tough skin. Because if I'm gonna live in this society, I'm gonna need it. She said, one thing is for sure. You were born black, you're gonna live black, and you're gonna die black. So get ready to face it.
Now, wow. From there, from the decision to take action, nonviolent action, what are some of the experiences that you guys had? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, the Oklahoma City sit-in movement that took place was really the first ever to exclusively utilize children, school-age children, as protesters against segregation. Is that true?
Well, I would say that we were the youngest group of kids because our kids age range from 6 to 17. And it was, they had a protest in Wichita, Kansas, that lasted a couple of days. But ours was the longest running city in the history of America, nonviolent. And when they started theirs in Greensboro, North Carolina, it was college students that set in 1960. But we've been sitting in here in Oklahoma City for 2 years now.
Wow. So young. What did you guys experience?
You know, it's sometimes when I think about it, it makes me cry because people were mean and cruel. And I've never known that. We were just poor. We didn't know people acted like that, because if we had acted like that, our parents would have killed us. People would spit on us. People would dump coffee on us. People would talk about our national heritage, the quality of our hair, the size of our nose. But they couldn't talk about us being disrespectful. We were not. They couldn't talk about us not being well dressed, because when we sat in, we wore our Sunday best. And we knew how to close our mouths because that's the way we were trained to do. I even had, while we were picketing at Animal's cafeteria here, I don't know why the guy picked me out, but he threw a chimpanzee on me.
Oh my goodness.
And the chimpanzee was about as big as I am, because I didn't weigh anything but 89 pounds then, a long way from now. But we went through quite a bit. I said, I don't know how we did it.
Well, that's my next question. How did you guys persevere through all of this? And especially as children.
We prayed a lot. We didn't realize the danger. Even when we went to jail. My mom went to jail 26 times. And the police department here in Oklahoma City was committed to nonviolence. And I think that's one reason that we didn't have the same type of problems that they had all over the United States. Because we had white people, and Black people, and Indians, Catholics and Jews working together hand in hand. Sometimes we had to walk by ourselves. But in spite of anything else, we never stopped. We never stopped. We didn't give up until the battles were won. It was like we were in a military. We knocked down one wall of discrimination and go to the next. The fight was on. But I want you to understand that it's not easy, period. Because in the white community, they hated us, a large portion of them. And in the Black community, they resented us because they felt that we were messing with their livelihood and trying to integrate the facilities. So it was a struggle.
Okay, so I mean, and you touch upon something important when you indicated that you didn't have universal support from Black people even.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Let me tell you something. The sit-inners were mostly involved, were kids of the have-nots. And I say that, but I'm really serious. They were not your professional, the majority of them were not your professional people's kids. They had no money. And we used to laugh and say, I sure hope they don't feed us today because we don't have no money to pay for it. But we were out there struggling and picketing and boycotting. And now you see the young people that participated are some of the strongest people that you want to meet.
So it was not only did your efforts and the efforts of your peers who engaged in this struggle, not only did they win the battle for integration, but it transformed them internally to make them stronger.
Yes, because they would tell us, now you can kick down the door of discrimination and segregation, but are you ready to march through that door? So it was always a challenge for us to do better.
Okay.
And I think now that's why so many of the young people are leaders in the community, because of the experiences that we had during that time.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. We have seen over the past several years, particularly, and especially since George Floyd, the airing of that video with his last moments, we've had protest after protest after protest take place. And we're dealing with race in a way that we really haven't dealt with since the era of the civil rights movement. And some people have actually made the argument that we're really in the middle of another civil rights movement. What is your take on that? What do you think?
Well, I think because of the fact that we became complacent. We thought that we had arrived as a race of people, only to see that there was a farce. That knee on George's neck was the knee on all of our necks. Because if it happened to him, it could happen to me, it could happen to you. Because when you're black, you're black.
Mm.
And one thing I'm happy about is that so many of us are still living, that we're involved in the other movement, that we could help and guide some of these young people now, because they don't have the type of parental guidance that we were lucky to have.
So what advice would you give young people who are struggling to understand why we're where we are at in America, struggling to understand why it is that justice and equality can seem so elusive? What advice?
I would say before you can know anything about your future or deal with a problem, you have to understand your past. You have to understand the people that gave their blood, sweat, and tears to make it possible for us to be where we are today. If you have no understanding of the movement, if you can't look at Emmett Till and Medgar Everett and people that have given their blood, sweat, and tears for the fight for freedom, then we need to study. We need to teach our kids their history. And when they know their history, even from their grandparents, parents, then it takes on a new perspective. For instance, let me tell you something. My mother was from Hoffman, Oklahoma, where it's in Offusky County. She used to tease them all the time. She said, I graduated in top 5 of my class. Yes, Miss Luper, it was only 5 people in your class. And she would tell us that when they would read books, that half the pages were torn out. And they would make up the conclusion to the story. But we have a responsibility to our unborn kids to teach them about their history, to give them that pride that is needed when times get hard and when you get slapped and stabbed in your back. We have to have the encouragement that our forefathers did and the fight that Harriet Tubman had and Roscoe Dunjee. We need to tell our story. And I know a lot of people don't want us to tell our story. We have that democracy is a state. My grandmother had 3 daughters, and she moved to the servant quarters of Nichols Hills in order that my mother could go to college. I wondered all the time, where did my mother get the fight to hang in there? And I saw her wrongly accused and misused, but she'd get up fighting each time. And she said, let me tell you a story. That when I was a child, my brother got sick. And they took my brother to the hospital. And my brother died because of the fact he was Black. And they would not treat him. You have to know where we've come from.
And it's not just an issue of Blacks telling other Blacks their story, but the Black story is a larger part of the American story.
That's what it is. The American story is Black history, is white history, is Indian history, because we're all there together. And that's why, let me tell you something, that's why it's so many different shades of Blackness. You're not gonna find 2 Blacks the same color. You got light Blacks, black Blacks, brown Blacks, and that just didn't happen. If I was president of this United States and I wanted this bigotry and hatred to go away, I would demand that a test be given. Because according to the law of America, when Dred Scott went to the Supreme Court, if you had a drop of Black blood in you, what were you? Black. And would test everybody in America. And then you would see that we were so intermingled that we already kin. That's how I would cure the problem.
Well, I mean, from a historical point of view, you know, if you think back on the racial purity laws that existed in the 20th century throughout the South, you know, you're onto something, because this obsession with purity, and we're all connected.
That's right.
We're definitely all connected.
And you can't teach white history without teaching Black history, because we're a strong part of this democracy. And if democracy is to become a reality, we're all in this war together.
Marilyn, what sort of advice would your mother give if she were alive today?
I often wonder that myself. One thing I know that we did before every demonstration, we prayed. Another thing that we did before every demonstration, we knew what we were fighting for and why we were fighting for. And we knew that if we would follow the plan, that eventually we would change the course of history. And that's what happened. I say all the time, I'm so glad I sat down, Mom, because when we sat down here in Oklahoma City, young people from all across this nation, it's even in the NAACP National Board minutes where we made our reports, and they were talking about the demonstrations, how they affected young people throughout this nation. And when we sat down, young people started standing up because they saw young people as young as we were hanging in there. We went to jail. I mean, people would laugh at me. I didn't think it was funny then, and I don't think it's funny now. When I would go to school, they would call me sit in, squat in, lay in, Luper because of my involvement in the civil rights movement. They tried to burn our house. The FBI almost got me killed. They had a bomb threat at Douglas. They came and got me out of school and taken me out to my mother's, and this man ran a stop sign and almost, it's been a struggle.
But obviously, one person can make a difference.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And you don't have to be old to make a difference. You can be young and make a difference. But you have to be determined. And you have to have a strong belief in something. And we were always taught, no matter what happened to you, when things go wrong in your lives and people are insulting you and being mean and cruel to you, and a lot of times as we sat down, we would be praying within ourselves. They would tell us, go to your knees because God will hear your moans and your groans, even when you're not thinking he's, and I know that that's right, because I remember when we were sitting there and they locked us in this restaurant and they sprayed insecticide on us. That's all part of the struggle. It didn't kill us. We still here, still standing.
Marilyn, thank you so very, very much for sharing your experience, for your words of encouragement, and the role of mentor that you serve to our young people today. Thank you.
And, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I love you and thank you a lot.